No one wanted to marry the orphan girl, until a poor rancher gave her his name, his home. Emily sat by the window, gazing out at the vast, empty landscape. The wind whispered through the trees, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the small town of Willow Creek. It was a peaceful evening, but for Emily, the quiet only deepened the loneliness that had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. She had lost her parents when she was just a little girl. A tragic accident had taken them both in a blink of an eye, leaving Emily with nothing but a few memories of their loving voices and warm embraces. Since then, she had lived in the town's orphanage, but that had only lasted until she became old enough to leave. At 16, the orphanage was no longer home for her. The kind people who ran it had done their best to raise her. But it wasn't the same as having her parents. As she grew older, Emily found herself struggling with the fact that no one seemed to want her. The other children had gone on to find families, but she was left behind, a quiet figure in the background. She had long ago learned to keep to herself, not wanting to burden anyone with the weight of her past. The townspeople were kind, but kindness wasn't the same as love. And for Emily, love had always seemed so far out of reach. Each day she worked at the local inn, but it wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. She helped clean the rooms, washed the dishes, and made sure the guests were comfortable. Brave. She had a soft smile that won the hearts of the visitors, but she never stayed in their thoughts for long. Emily knew her place. She was the orphan girl, the one who didn't belong to anyone, the one who had to make do. Most days, she went home to a small room above the inn, a place that felt more like a shelter than a home. It was warm enough in the winter, but it was always filled with an emptiness that made it hard for her to breathe. She often found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, staring out the small window as night fell. She wondered what it would be like to have someone by her side, to have a family to come home to at the end of each day. She didn't want much. She didn't need grand gestures or fancy things. What she wanted was simple. Someone who would see her for who she was, not the girl who had been left behind. Someone who would love her, not out of pity, but because they truly cared. But that dream seemed impossible. Every suitor that came through town passed her by, never even giving her a second glance. They saw the orphan girl and nothing more. It wasn't that Emily didn't try. She had hoped, at first, that someone might see past her past, but over time, she stopped believing in those dreams. She spent most of her time with the older women in the town, learning how to keep a household running and listening to their stories. They told her about love, about what it meant to be a wife, and how important it was to stand by your man. Emily listened, but a part of her knew those words would never apply to her. She was different. Despite the quiet despair, Emily had always been a hopeful soul. She found joy in small things, like the way the birds sang in the morning, or how the flowers bloomed in the spring. She loved the old oak tree in the town square, where she would sometimes sit with a book, lost in a world of imagination. She dreamed of adventures, of traveling far from Willow Creek to places she had only read about, but in the back of her mind there was always the reminder that she didn't belong, not to any family, not to any man. And that reality kept her tethered to the life she had. One day, as Emily was walking to the market, she overheard a group of women gossiping. They were talking about the upcoming town dance, an event that was always filled with excitement and anticipation. Emily had never attended one. The thought of being overlooked in such a crowd made her feel small. The women chatted about who would be attending, who would likely catch the eye of the eligible bachelors, and who would be left to sit alone in the corner, watching others dance. Emily's name was never mentioned. She sighed, feeling the weight of her invisibility. He glances around and desperate. As she reached the market, she tried to push the thoughts from her mind. She had no time to dwell on dreams that would never come true. She had work to do, and she was good at it. That was all that mattered. Later that evening, after her shift at the inn, Emily returned to her small room. She sat by the window, looking out at the town that seemed so far away from the life she had imagined for herself. The sound of footsteps outside caught her attention. She turned her head and saw a man walking down the street, his boots making a steady rhythm on the dirt road. It was Jack, the poor rancher who lived just outside of town. She had seen him before, of course. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Jack. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he was strong, hard-working, and had a quiet respect about him that made people take notice. Jack had always kept to himself, much like Emily. He didn't attend the town dances, didn't join in the gossip, and didn't try to get anyone's attention. He had a small ranch on the outskirts of town where he worked from dawn until dusk. It wasn't much, but it was his. Emily often wondered about him, though she didn't dare approach him. He was a man of few words, and she had heard the whispers about him being just as lonely as she was. But she never thought much of it. There was no reason to believe he'd ever look her way. As she watched him disappear into the distance, she felt a strange sense of longing. She didn't know what it was, but something about Jack made her feel seen. For the briefest moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have someone like him in her life. But that thought quickly passed. She had learned long ago that daydreams didn't change anything. She returned to her room, closed the curtains, and sat on the edge of her bed, trying to ignore the ache in her heart. Tomorrow would be another long day of cleaning, cooking, and living in the shadow of the life she would never have. She closed her eyes, silently wishing for something more, but knowing deep down that she would likely be left with nothing. Jack had always been a man of few words. He wasn't the type to join in with the lively chatter at the town gatherings, nor did he seek attention. He had his ranch, his land, and that was enough for him. His life was simple and hard. The mornings started before dawn, the afternoons were spent in the hot sun, and the evenings brought little more than a tired body in a lonely bed. He had once thought about marrying, about having a family, but those thoughts felt far away now. Most women in Willow Creek weren't interested in a rancher who had nothing to offer but hard work and a humble life. Yet, as the years passed, the loneliness seemed to grow. Jack had never been good at talking to people. He wasn't like the other men in town who could spin stories, charm a crowd, or easily win over a woman's heart. He had never been interested in that. Instead, he spent his time fixing fences, mending roofs, and tending to the animals. The ranch had been his father's before it was his, and now Jack worked it as best as he could, hoping to keep the place alive, though it was often a struggle. He had heard about Emily, of course. Everyone in town knew the orphan girl who worked at the inn. She was always polite, always helpful, but always alone. Jack noticed her the first time he saw her walking through town. Her eyes were full of quiet sadness, a kind of loneliness that he understood all too well. But he had never thought of approaching her. Perhaps. He wasn't sure why, but something about her seemed untouchable. She was different. She carried a quiet strength that made her seem like she belonged to a world he wasn't part of. Still, as he watched her work at the inn, Jack couldn't help but admire her.
Her head. She was graceful in the way she moved, as if she didn't need anything to prove her worth. She worked hard, never complaining, never asking for attention.
But Jack could see it in her eyes, the longing for something more. He had caught her glancing out the window a few times, as if she, too, was searching for a way out of the life she had been given. And maybe that was what had drawn him to her. He knew what it felt like to be trapped in a life you hadn't chosen, to be waiting for something or someone to make a difference. The thought lingered with him. Even as he went about his daily tasks on the ranch, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily, about how different she seemed from the other women in town, or status, or anything that most men would want to offer. She just seemed to want something simple, something genuine. And in that, Jack saw an opportunity. But it wasn't about saving her.
It wasn't about charity. Jack didn't want her to marry him out of pity.
He wanted her to see something in him that no one else had seen. A man who might not have riches or fancy words, but who could offer loyalty and love. One evening, as the sun began to set and the last rays of light turned the sky into a canvas of orange and pink, Jack made up his mind. He had worked on his ranch alone for too long, and he had watched Emily for far too many days, wondering if she felt the same way about the world they both lived in. He decided it was time to speak to her, to offer her something that he hoped would change both of their lives. But how could he do it? What could he say that wouldn't sound like desperation? How could he explain to her that he saw something in her that he hadn't seen in anyone else? Jack didn't know the answers to these questions, but he was determined to try. The next morning he woke early, just as the sun was rising over the hills. He saddled his horse and rode into town, his heart racing with uncertainty. The ride was quiet, the sound of hooves on the dirt road the only noise that filled the air. Ray. He tried to calm his nerves, but his thoughts kept returning to Emily. What would she think? Would she turn him away, as she had done with so many others? Or would she see something in him, just as he saw something in her? When Jack arrived at the inn, he could see Emily standing by the door looking out at the street. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore a faded dress that had seen better days. There was a kind of quiet elegance about her, even in the simplicity of her appearance. As she looked up, she saw Jack approaching, and her face brightened with a small smile. "Good morning, Mr. Jack," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Morning, Emily," he replied, tipping his hat. There was a moment of awkward silence between them, and Jack felt his heart beat faster. He had no idea what to say next. He had rehearsed 100 different ways to ask her, but now that the moment was here, words seemed hard to find. Jack started, then paused, his words caught in his throat. Emily watched him patiently, her eyes full of curiosity but not judgment. It was as if she was waiting for him to find the right words, to say what he needed to say. Finally, Jack took a deep breath. "I've been thinking," he began, "about how lonely we both must be. I work my ranch every day and there's no one to share it with. And you, well, I know what it's like to be overlooked, to feel like no one really sees you."
He stopped again, searching her face for a reaction.
But Emily didn't say anything. She just waited.
"I know I don't have much to offer," Jack continued, his voice quieter now. "But I do have a home."
Because I have a ranch, and I can offer you something that's real. My name, my care, my promise. I can't give you wealth or fine things, but I can't give you loyalty. And I think that's worth something. Ray. Emily's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Jack thought he had said something wrong. But then she lowered her gaze, as if deep in thought. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, and Jack began to doubt himself. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she didn't want anything to do with him. But then Emily looked up, her face soft and open. "You're asking me to marry you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes, Emily, I am. If you'll have me." The silence between them stretched on, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with possibility. Emily took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, Jack saw something new in her eyes. Hope. "Yes!" she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll marry you, Jack!" The days that followed were a blur for Emily. She had agreed to marry Jack, but she found it hard to believe it was real. It felt like a dream she had never dared to wish for.
A poor rancher, a man she had barely spoken to before, had asked her to marry him, and she had said yes. She had never imagined that her life could change so quickly, so completely.
The first few days after the proposal were filled with quiet moments, each one making her feel more at peace than she had ever felt before. She couldn't stop thinking about Jack, about the life they were about to start together. He had shown her a side of life she hadn't known existed, one built not on grand gestures or wealth, but on honesty, kindness, and a willingness to share what little he had. Jack had come to the inn every day since their agreement, stopping by after working on his ranch. They would talk for hours, sitting on the porch of the inn as the sun began to set. Emily had always thought of Jack as a quiet man, but when they spoke she realized how much more there was to him. He wasn't just hard-working. He was kind, thoughtful, and patient. He had a way of listening to her that made her feel understood, like she wasn't just the orphan girl who no one wanted.
Jack made her feel important. They talked about the future, about what their life together would look like.
As Jack was determined to make a home for her, a place where she could be happy. He told her that they would work together on the ranch, that she would help him with the animals in the land. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. And he promised her that they would build something strong, something that would last. Breath. Emily had never felt so reassured in her life. She wasn't used to having someone make promises like that to her, especially not someone who seemed so certain about their future together. But as the days passed, Emily's doubts began to creep in. She had spent so much time feeling invisible, so much time convincing herself that no one would ever want her, that it was hard to believe this was real. She had never known love the way Jack was offering it. Simple, steady, and unconditional.
It wasn't like the stories she had read in books, where love was grand and exciting.
But in its own way, Jack's love was stronger, more real than anything she had imagined.
Yet there was a nagging feeling deep inside her that made her question if she was worthy of it.
She had spent years alone, and now in such a short time, she was about to start a new life with a man she barely knew. It felt too sudden, too fast. Free. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But when she thought about Jack, when she remembered the way he had looked at her when he asked her to marry him, those doubts faded. He had never asked her to change. He had never expected her to be anyone other than who she was. He just wanted her to be his wife, to be part of his life. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Emily looked at Jack and felt a strange sense of calm. The sunset was beautiful, casting a warm glow over the town. Jack's eyes were focused on the horizon, but he could sense that Emily was deep in thought. Desperate. "Emily," he said, his voice low and steady. "Are you sure about this?" "About us?" His words were simple, but they held a weight. He wanted to make sure she was certain, that she wasn't just saying yes because she felt sorry for him, or because it was the only choice she had. Breaths. Emily turned to him, her heart beating faster. She had never been asked such a question before. She had always made decisions on her own, always convinced herself that she didn't need anyone else. But now, for the first time, she realized how much she wanted this life with Jack. She wanted to build a future with him not because she had to, but because she truly believed in it. "I'm sure," she said softly. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Jack. Someone who sees me, not as an orphan, but as someone worth loving." Breaths. She paused, her eyes meeting his. "I'm ready. I want this." I want you. Jack smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was the first time she had seen him smile so warmly, so freely. Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. It was real. Everything was real. The next few days were filled with preparations for their wedding. The townspeople, who had once whispered about the strange couple, were now watching with interest. Emily and Jack's union was the talk of the town. Some were curious, others skeptical, but most seemed genuinely happy for them. There was something about their love that made people stop and take notice. It wasn't the kind of love that came with grand celebrations or expensive gifts. It was the kind of love that grew slowly, quietly, and steadily, like a plant that took root deep in the soil before it blossomed. Emily and Jack didn't need anything fancy. They didn't need a big wedding with a long guest list. They just needed each other. And so they decided to marry in a simple ceremony, with only a few close friends and family members present. The ceremony was held in the town's small chapel, a place that had seen many weddings over the years, but none quite like this one. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the sky was a brilliant blue. It was the perfect day for a fresh start, for a new life. As Emily walked down the aisle, her heart raced with anticipation. She felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, but it didn't matter. What mattered was Jack, waiting for her at the altar, his expression full of love and hope. When she reached him, he took her hand, and in that moment she knew that everything had led to this. This was where she was meant to be. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. There were no extravagant vows, no grand speeches. Just Jack and Emily promising to be there for each other, to work together, and to build a life filled with love. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Jack kissed her softly, and Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never felt so at home, so complete. As they left the chapel hand in hand, the townspeople gathered outside, offering their congratulations. Emily looked around, seeing the familiar faces of the people who had watched her grow up, and she realized something important. She was no longer the orphan girl. She was Emily Jack, a woman with a future, with a family, and with a love that was stronger than anything she had ever known. The first few weeks of married life were harder than Emily had expected, but they were also filled with moments of unexpected joy. Jack and Emily worked together on the ranch from the moment the sun rose until it sank below the horizon. There was always something to do, feeding the animals, mending fences, and taking care of the land. The work was physically demanding, and at times Emily's hands would ache from the endless tasks. But there was a strange sense of pride in it. She wasn't just working for herself anymore. She was working for Jack, for the life they were building together. Jack had made sure that Emily understood everything about running the ranch. He taught her how to care for the animals, how to tend to the crops, and how to fix the fences that needed constant attention. At first, Emily struggled. She had never done much physical labor before, and she found herself frustrated at times when things didn't go as planned. But Jack was patient. He never once raised his voice or showed frustration. Instead, he would show her again, helping her with the tasks and encouraging her every step of the way. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the fields, Emily wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at Jack. His face was sunburned, his hands rough from years of hard work, but he smiled at her, his eyes full of warmth. "You're getting the hang of it," Jack said, his voice steady and reassuring. Emily smiled back, though she still felt unsure of herself. "I'm trying my best," she replied. Jack nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. That's all that matters. The days seemed to blur together as the work on the ranch continued. The season slowly shifted from the warmth of summer to the crispness of fall. Emily had never paid much attention to the changing seasons before, but now she noticed the small details, how the leaves turned golden and red, how the air grew cooler in the evenings, and how the harvests changed with the weather. Each day felt like a new adventure, a new opportunity to grow and learn. At night, after the work was done, Jack and Emily would sit on the porch together, their hands resting on the worn wood of the railing. They would watch the stars appear in the sky, the same stars Emily had gazed at many times before. But now, they felt different. She wasn't looking at the stars alone anymore. She was looking at them with Jack by her side, someone who cared for her, someone who shared her dreams. One evening, as they sat in the silence of the night, Emily turned to Jack.
Do you ever miss the days when you were on your own?
She asked, her voice soft. Jack glanced at her, then looked back at the stars. He thought for a moment before answering.
I've spent most of my life alone, he said. It's what I knew.
But I don't miss it. Not anymore. There's something different about having someone to share it all with.
Emily's heart warmed at his words.
She had never thought about it that way before. She had always felt like she was meant to be on her own, like she had to face the world by herself. But now, she realized how much it meant to have someone by her side who didn't just share the work, but who also shared her life, her dreams, and her hopes for the future.
Over time, Emily began to feel more comfortable in her new life.
She wasn't the same shy, quiet girl who had come to the ranch in the beginning. She had learned to take pride in her work, to stand tall when she faced a challenge, and to believe in herself. She was no longer the orphan girl who had no place in the world. She was a rancher's wife, someone who had found a place where she belonged. Jack noticed the change in her too. He saw the way she walked with more confidence, the way she took on new tasks with determination. He knew that they were both changing, growing together in ways that neither of them had expected. But the one thing that remained constant was their love for each other. It was simple, steady, and strong. They had built their life on trust, hard work, and shared dreams. And that was enough. As winter approached, the work on the ranch slowed down. The cold winds blew across the land, and the animals huddled together for warmth. But inside the small, cozy house, Emily and Jack found comfort in each other. They spent their evenings in front of the fireplace, Jack telling stories from his youth, and Emily listening intently, laughing at his jokes, and teasing him about some of his more colorful adventures. One night, as they sat by the fire, Jack turned to Emily, his face serious but his eyes warm. "You know, Emily," he said, "I never thought I'd find someone like you. Someone who can make all this feel like home." Emily's heart swelled at his words. She had always dreamed of finding a place where she could belong, a place where she could feel loved and accepted. And now, she had that. She had Jack, and she had the ranch. It was a life that wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it was real. "I feel the same way," she said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd have a place like this, with someone who cares about me." Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "We've got each other. That's all we need." The days passed, and the quiet rhythms of ranch life continued, but Emily knew that their journey together was just beginning. They had come so far already, and there was so much more to look forward to. Together, they had built something stronger than either of them had imagined. A life built on love, on hard work, and on the simple joys of sharing a home with someone who truly cared. The winter months passed quietly on the ranch. The cold winds howled through the trees, and the snow covered the ground in a thick white blanket. Inside the small house, the fire crackled and popped, casting a warm glow that made everything feel cozy. Jack and Emily spent their days working together, taking care of the animals, mending fences, and making sure the ranch was ready for the coming spring. The work was hard, but it never felt like a burden.
Not when they were doing it together. Emily had become an expert at taking care of the animals.
She had learned how to milk the cows, feed the chickens, and tend to the horses. She even helped with the farming, planting seeds in the spring and harvesting in the fall. Every day, she felt stronger, more confident in herself and in her abilities. She had found her place, and she knew she was good at what she did. But it wasn't just the work that made Emily feel like she belonged. It was the simple moments she shared with Jack. The quiet evenings by the fire, the long walks in the snow, the way he would smile at her after a long day's work, as if he was proud of everything they had built together. In the beginning, she had worried that she wasn't enough, that she wouldn't be able to keep up with Jack's expectations. But now she realized that the only thing Jack ever wanted from her was her love, her companionship, and her presence in his life. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Jack. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, and the world seemed peaceful, as if everything was exactly as it should be. Jack sat next to her, his arm around her shoulders, his face relaxed and content. "Jack," Emily began, her voice soft but filled with meaning, "I've been thinking a lot about our life together." Jack turned to look at her, his brow furrowing slightly in curiosity. "What about it?" he asked. Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. I never thought I would have a life like this. I never thought I would be happy not like this." Jack's eyes softened, and he pulled her closer. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd have someone by my side either. But now I don't know what I'd do without you."
Emily felt her heart swell with love for him.
She had never known a love like this, steady, patient, and true. She had never imagined that she could find someone who loved her for exactly who she was, someone who made her feel important, someone who made her feel like she was worth something. And yet here she was, sitting next to Jack, the man who had changed her life. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "The life you had before? The loneliness?" Jack looked at her, his gaze steady. He had spent so many years alone working the ranch, living in solitude. But now he had Emily, and everything had changed. The loneliness that had once filled his life was gone, replaced by something better, something real.
"No," he said softly, shaking his head.
"I thought I would, but I don't. Not when I have you here." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been alone, always had to take care of herself. But now, for the first time in her life, she realized that she didn't have to do it alone anymore. Jack was there by her side every step of the way. As the months went by, Jack and Emily continued to build their life together. The ranch flourished under their care, and with each passing season they grew closer. They learned more about each other, shared their dreams and fears, and discovered new ways to support and care for one another. The love they shared was simple but powerful. It wasn't about grand gestures or fancy things. It was about being there for each other, day in and day out, no matter what. Breath. One afternoon, as they worked in the fields, Emily looked at Jack and smiled. He was focused on fixing a broken fence, his face lined with concentration. She couldn't help but admire the way he worked, the way he put his heart into everything he did. He had a quiet strength about him, a strength that came not from his muscles but from the love and dedication he poured into everything he cared about. Jack paused for a moment and looked at her, sensing her gaze. "What's on your mind?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his brow. Pat. Emily walked over to him, her heart full. I was just thinking, she said softly, about how lucky we are, about how far we've come. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners.
I don't think luck has much to do with it, he said. We've worked hard for this, Emily.
Breath. Together.
Emily nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She had worked hard, yes.
But it had never felt like work. It had felt like a shared purpose, something that they had built together from the ground up. She had come to the ranch with nothing but hope, and now she had everything she had ever dreamed of.
As the years went by, Jack and Emily's love continued to grow.
They were no longer just a poor rancher and his wife. They were partners, equals, a team that had built something strong and lasting.
And though their life was simple, it was rich in ways that mattered most.
One summer evening, as they sat on the porch together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily looked at Jack with a deep, loving gaze.
I love you, she said softly, her voice filled with all the years of hard work, shared dreams, and quiet moments they had spent together. Jack smiled, his heart full. I love you too, Emily, he replied, his voice steady and sure. And in that moment, Emily realized that she had found everything she had ever wanted. Base. She had found love, home, and a future with the one person who had never given up on her. Together they had created a life that was simple but full of meaning. A life that would last just like their love.